Hello and welcome to the Happy PharmD podcast. I'm Dr. Alex Barker, founder and CEO of the Happy PharmD, where we get pharmacists jobs they love. And we love getting jobs for pharmacists in companies where they're excellent and they treat their people well. And that's why I have on the podcast today Michael Seyfer, who is the CEO of the marketing agency Hailey Sault and the Institute of Healthcare Excellence. His work with the Institute is focusing on helping companies excelling at treating their people well and ultimately decreasing costs and burnout for their people. I appreciate his perspective in this podcast because he shares what companies are doing, what companies need in order to do better for their people and their patients, of course. And his perspective is definitely outside of healthcare, and it was very interesting, I think, how he shared his perspective of what executives and CEOs think about how to make their healthcare organizations better. And so with that, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Mike, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex.
So when I first read about you and your work, the podcast and the Institute, I was immediately drawn to your focus on fighting burnout and making institutions excellent and bringing those, up. So give us a little bit of background about who you are and how you got into this field.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I sort of backed into the work with the Institute for Healthcare Excellence. For most of my career, I've been in marketing and have owned a healthcare marketing firm called Hailey Sault for the last 12 years, 11 years with my former partner, Marsha Heisted, and now on my own as she's retired. And during that journey, we had a former client that went from being patient experience director at Maple Grove Hospital in suburban Minneapolis to the Institute for Healthcare Excellence. And at Maple Grove, she was really in charge of creating what was arguably at the time some of the best patient experience work that was being done in the state of Minnesota. I mean, from the facility to the work with physicians and their leadership, including their former CEO, Andy Cochran, just believed in really elevating that patient experience through their work with nurses, physicians, and designing the space, and just having that be part of their core values. So she went to the Institute and joined its founder, Dr. Bill Maples, former Mayo oncologist, who later in his career had identified that, and this is well before COVID, that the business of healthcare was sort of stripping the humanity out of healthcare. That it was just imposing more time constraints and things that we're all familiar with. The time constraints, the focus on productivity, not recognizing as internal cultures that the people that were providing the care needed to thrive as well. And so they began work in about 2017 to formalize through a published study with a partner organization, the National Task Force for Humanity, and a 5 health system study on what it would take to get humanity back into healthcare, the skills it would take to reverse burnout and exhaustion and create that sort of emotional state, the positive emotional state that would contribute to thriving. So fast forward to 2018, we worked together with them on a brand initiative, and then COVID happens and the whole world turns upside down, especially the healthcare world. Yeah. And we see throughout that burnout and exhaustion skyrocket, the propensity for nurses and docs to leave the business and also jump ship and go to different places where cultures are being emphasized more. So Bill Maples was ready to retire and sell the company, and it's a pretty clear mission and value proposition for me, and so acquired it last year. And so, like I said, sort of backed into this, but have been working with the Institute at least for the last 5 years.
That's awesome. Well, you've been in healthcare as long as I've been a pharmacist. I graduated in 2012 into the profession, and burnout was one of the first things that I got to experience
Yeah.
firsthand. And I personally, I suffered from just disenfranchisement. Like I just didn't care anymore. And one thing that I've learned about pharmacists in particular, I think it's true for doctors and nurses, that at the end of the day, we join this profession to help people. And
Right.
over and over again, I think at the heart of the burnout problem is the environment and the focus on number care versus health care,
Hmm.
wanting to get our numbers up. Um, and one of the reasons why I was really looking forward to talking to you is to learn. I've looked at the research. I've read probably every study there has been published, at least, about burnout within pharmacy. And I've read quite a few studies in the world of medicine and in nurses. And I would love your perspective on this, because what I think all of the studies point to is that the way to reverse this, the way to increase everyone's excellence, is by, I would say, interjecting basic humanity into the workplace. Things like having team meetings
Sure.
improve
Oh, yeah.
burnout.
Yeah.
Increasing management's communication skills improves team
Right.
cohesion and buy-in from employees. It's all of these like soft skills development. Now, in practice, is that what you're seeing at these institutions that have high scores in excellence?
Yeah, you used a phrase that I think is a bit of a misnomer, the soft skills, and I know that's not intentional, but we run across that a lot. So when you think about and what you are saying in our experience is spot on. The communication, which is the foundation for trust, respect, empathy, seeing the world through somebody else's perspective. When you become really good at communication, you're a great listener. You ask good questions. So those skills are central to the trust amongst the colleagues, physicians to physicians, nurses to nurses, and in between other clinical staff. So when that improves and people practice those skills, that team cohesion goes up, and interactions with patients significantly increases in its quality. And so it's not counterintuitive to the business side. So oftentimes we hear it's paraphrased or characterized as soft skills, but in reality, you're teaching some basic cultural skills that, frankly, like other small businesses and businesses throughout the country really wrap their arms around. Like you hear about cultures of emerging tech firms, or think about any inspirational story of an internal culture, and you're like, God, I would love to work there. And very rarely do we find healthcare workers, physicians, doctors, nurses, non-clinical staff go, man, our culture is so amazing. Like, I challenge you to remember the last time you heard somebody talk about their culture as, holy cow, this is amazing.
I don't know of many major organizations.
Right.
Within our work, we know pharmacists that get into jobs they love, and they talk about the people that they're with. And there is that cohesive
Sure.
vision and buy-in and team support. But none of them, I mean, there's a few universities that can supply that.
Sure.
And a few, I'm not comfortable saying names on a podcast talking about this,
Yeah, of course.
but I would say by and large, the vast majority of major organizations can't say that.
Well, and let's face it, like it's hard at scale. When you're talking about a couple thousand person organization with many levels of management, and department stratification. Like it's hard to create a cohesive culture because there are so many variables dependent on the individual manager. And let's face it, like scorecards don't create culture. I mean, you can't say, hey, we've got a great culture. And I mean, it's good to say, hey, we've got some quantifiable metrics that would support that we have a culture, but you can't create a culture through a handbook and a scorecard. So in today's, especially healthcare environment where, doctors, nurses, all the staff have been through some of the biggest, I mean, this is like, I equate it to being in a foxhole in World War II, and for my generation, I'm 53, when I grew up, and like World War II was this sort of idealistic, like John Wayne kind of thing, right? And, painted over with this patriotic brush. And then we started to see what war really looked like in, Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan and other visualization of it. And you also realize, like, man, that time in a foxhole with somebody, like that's a hard relationship to break. But frankly, like people have been through their own foxhole moment for the last couple of years, and now they're getting back to this sense of normalcy. And the same thing with people who've been through other sort of PTSD driven trauma. You need the skills to recover. So healthcare is in this interesting space where profitability tanked for a couple of years. Even 2022 was supposed to be a recovery year. The market tanked, and so it had its impact on the financial performance. So I get that the business of healthcare says, hey, we've got to generate revenue this year. We've got to get back to profitability. And the two clearest ways to do that are cost cutting and increasing productivity requirements. But beneath all that, they have a team that's, again, been through their own war, their own version of war, without the skills to grow back and provide the care at the quality level and at the level that they need personally to do their jobs. So the industry is at this really interesting moment.
Given the conditions that you talked about, and there's a lot that we could talk about there, moral injury, burnout rates, but
right.
I would love instead to hear from your perspective, what are these successful companies doing? And I'll add in the caveat, the ones that are, obviously these companies are seeking profitability, but some value their people and are attempting to both provide valuable service, life-saving services, as well as keeping their people happy.
Yeah.
What are the practices, policies, even, and things that you're seeing within these successful organizations?
So from our perspective, it's the work that we've done over the last couple of years, and we've seen turnarounds in, let's say, departments. So two things happen simultaneously. People are given the skills and the very definable skills to bring into practice every day. So one part of that is listening with empathy, being respectful, transparency, approaching people with an open mind and listening, asking good questions. And I'm talking about both with your colleagues and with patients. So when that happens, we're treating each other as real humans. And there's a chemical thing that happens between us, and the reward that we get back is very positive for that interaction. So just imagine that building day after day, both with your teams and with patients. So what happens as a result of that is burnout scores go down, exhaustion scores go down. They talk about different thriving measurements going up, and it may be like 3%, 5%. And now we're kind of getting back into scorecards, but when you measure stuff like that, the ROI on that, so the impact on profitability, is that you reduce turnover, you improve colleague engagement and satisfaction, you improve patient satisfaction because they're having a better relationship with their providers, and safety scores go up. And so all these things together, some have direct implications. So when you reduce burnout and exhaustion, turnover goes down. And so if the average cost, we've got a colleague that practiced in Oklahoma as a former chief medical officer. They did a quantitative study on the cost of turnover. And for every nurse, it was about $120,000 to replace every nurse, both in the loss of, productivity, the cost of recruitment, the incentive structure, and getting somebody up to speed. And multiply that by 5 to 10 times for physicians, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. The lowest estimates I've ever heard was 1.5 annual salary cost just to replace, whoever it is. And
Yeah.
obviously, the more specialized a doctor is, for example, the harder it is, the more costly.
Yeah.
So, given the kind of the base, it sounds like from what you're saying is creating that human to human connection.
Mm-hmm.
What are some specific things? So if like there's a manager listening to this podcast or a director, executive, what were some of the activities or things that those leaders had done to create that kind of change within their employees?
Well, it started with a commitment to changing their culture. And so it starts with that belief that you can change. And even if that is from a system level within a department, a service line, the facility, maybe an employee group, just believing that can change. And in our experience, again, it goes beyond some of the maybe app-based solutions. So, putting tools in somebody's hand that can sometimes be like just extra work, right? So you talked a little bit about creating more resilience. So I'm going to give you an app that you're going to use to, in the end, be more resilient. And the adoption rate on it and utilization kind of goes down over time. And it ends up just being like one more thing we've got to manage on top of the EMR, on top of all my other reporting. Now I've got to use this app, as opposed to, really being provided with through a curriculum development or deployment, these skills. And so and I could only really speak to our model, but our model is the sort of train the trainer methodology. So we create masterful trainers in a small group. They work with their peers and colleagues to propagate that. We have routine check-ins to make sure that those skills are being cultivated. And again, when you think about there's a tipping point between, again, that sort of idea that we're giving you more work to do versus we're giving you some skills to be more powerful in your work. And in my professional experience, we've worked with a lot of coaches at both these firms. And the only one that's ever made an impact is the one that focused on us as people. So we've worked with professional development coaches, other coaches that are going to, help us communicate as teams more from the marketing firm side, how to create clearer paths to success. Like some of that, I'll just say it, like BS kind of stuff that as you get thrown at you. And again, it sticks for a couple of weeks, a month, and then you realize like that's not sustainable. But the coaches that come in and work with you on human development, personal development, like to help you provide the skills to help you really develop as a human, the crossover benefit on that is amazing because you go back to home and you're a more powerful person. And then we bring that positivity to the workplace and we're more powerful and productive at the workplace. So that's a long, anecdote to say that in my experience, skills that teach and contribute to our potential as humans are the ones that are most effective, not the skills that are like, here's how to function in this specific instance.
Yeah, adaptability, right? And that in turn creates resiliency.
Yeah.
I agree with you. In fact, when I was getting first into the research about burnout in the workplace, 2017, I think, the overwhelming message at the time was resiliency is the answer. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, and I'll take any chance I can get to to bash this. I think you're a father as well. You mentioned
Yeah.
it before the recording. As a father myself, I want my children to be resilient. It'll mean that they'll be probably more successful in life when inevitably they fail.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in an environment that is causing you burnout, internal changes can only go so far.
Right.
And they're likely not going to change the environment that's causing the very problem you're experiencing.
Right.
Um, I've read the studies about, I would say, like short term, coaching,
Sure.
consulting, therapy, and from what I've gathered, it does seem like you do this for a little bit and it may improve things a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in terms of burnout scores. Um, but that commitment seems to be the most important thing. I think you and I could probably have a very unproductive conversation talking about leaders who say one thing, but it's very clear that another is happening.
Yeah.
How do you do you hmm,
I think I know where you're going with this. If I can interject real quick, because
sure.
when you look at the um, the condition that exists, burnout and exhaustion, and you're like, well, we're going to lower burnout scores. We're going to turn around burnout. Like you are guided towards the outcome, right? But you're not treating the root cause or the condition.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's a timeless healthcare analogy. So if burnout and exhaustion are real mental health states, and if we in more recent years acknowledge mental health as real health, then let's get to the root cause. And so I think the concept of positive organizational design is really strong. So you change the root cause to get to the ideal outcome. And so think about even the idea of scorecards. So oftentimes scorecards, they become stressors because what you see in your own personal scorecard or your department's scorecard are measures of success or failure. And when that's below, it causes stress. And when it's above, you're always thinking, God, I can't let that slip. In this instance of burnout, if you shifted your mentality away from we're going to lower scores as our main goal, but let's instead work on our systems, our people, the core ways that they're working, the environments that they're working on. The byproduct will be reduced scores, lower exhaustion, better thriving scores, reduced turnover, et cetera, like more profitability.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that idea of, and we're really pursuing this idea of positive organizational design. And I think you've alluded a couple of times in this conversation, like let's focus on the positives. And there is a world of positivity to be embraced out there. I mean, this dynamic that got exacerbated since March of 2020 can be turned around, and it is possible for healthcare organizations to have super positive cultures. Just need to set our mind to it and prioritize it and realize what those benefits are. That sounds pretty, when you say that out loud like that, that sounds a little ambiguous. But I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are doing the work that we're doing, and they all have their own methodologies. So I guess in saying that, my point is that there's no absence of external help to do this work.
To add to that, you mentioned commitment being, that's the beginning. People on the front lines, everybody knows that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And I do think executives are aware that this is a problem. And there's obviously a large portion of executives that may look at this as it's a box to check off. We're measuring burnout, we're doing this, we're doing this. Where do you think the commitment is coming from those executives that see the problem but actually want to address the solution. Like, what is the psychology behind those kinds of leaders? And and maybe more an impractical question is how do we create more of those kinds of people? I don't know the answer, and maybe you don't either, but I wish I knew the answer to that.
Mhm. I have my theory on this is this, that a lot of time, and when I'm talking about healthcare, I'm mainly referring to health systems.
Hmm.
So a lot of innovation in healthcare uh, has been developed upstream. You know,
Yep.
in the pharmaceutical business, the treatments, the medicine, like the testing, the R&D, that was all upstream. And so it is oftentimes at the health system level the job to diagnose, follow a protocol, communicate, and sometimes, in more acute cases or traumatic cases, like, to get innovative about this, quick solution. So, but it becomes down to diagnosis and adherence to a protocol. So I'm not sure that, and I have not seen a great preponderance of like risk taking.
Mm.
So, we talk from the outside. We want people to sort of be big thinkers and dreamers and change the world. But while people got into healthcare in order to uh, care for people, to change people's lives, at its heart, at this level, it's not really about taking a risk. So when you think about leadership, it's still about protocols, adhering to quantitative measurement, financial performance, reporting to boards. I mean, there's so much of this sort of standardized reporting. I mean, HCAP scores, all of qualifiers that
Yeah.
we focus our measurement and our performance on. So there is maybe 10% of leaders that have that drive to create change.
Mm.
Um, and it shows up in a lot of different ways, and a lot of times it shows up in external facing ways, but it's hard to be that charismatic kind of leader to say, I want to change your world, meaning for people internal, in order to change our external. I was on a Zoom with a health system out of New Jersey today, and they were talking about their brand performance, and they had all their marketing firms together, and they were talking about how from a brand performance, their short term looks really positive, and then long term, there's maybe some risk longer term. So we did some breakout sessions on how they could address competitiveness in the marketplace, be the number one brand. And one of my comments, and again, I come to that conversation through the lens of the Institute for Healthcare Excellence. I'm like, if you want to drive your brand, people care about their relationship with their physicians, with the nurses that are giving them care, feeling like a person, not a number. So in this environment, I go back again to invest in the ability for your people to deliver on that hope to their patients. And if you put your people first, a lot of times we talk about putting the patient first. And it's hard to say you can't put the patient first, but at some point in this post-pandemic world, for a while, we might have to put doctors and nurses first in order to provide the kind of care that patients need. Meaning that they can't continue to, if you remember, like as a kid, I may be a little older than you, so like Stretch Armstrong was a toy, and it was this big
Yeah.
elastic doll, and you could stretch it out to like 3 feet. But like, let's use that as the analogy that our caregivers have been living in this very elasticized world where they have been stretched to the max. And how long is that sustainable? Just physiologically, like, and emotionally, like how long is that sustainable? So we've got to get them back to being a whole being again, with the ability to be agile and elastic again, rather than just living in that stretched out environment.
Mm.
So to do that, like, that is putting, again, I would say, for a period of time, our physicians, nurses, and other clinical staff first will get us to that real elevated patient experience. It's sort of contrarian.
Well, maybe I'm contrarian because I agree with you, but it goes back to what I think a lot of people talk about in terms of mental health. When the airplane's going down and the oxygen masks fall, who do you put it on first?
Well, there you go. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, the plane is going down in healthcare, and people are wondering, how do we turn this around? How do we change it? And many people are just trying to go forward day to day because patients' lives are at stake.
For sure.
There's hope, I think, that things can change, but I think a lot of people get the sense of this is not going in the right direction. I think I'd like to end this interview by hearing from you the hope that you have that things can be excellent, but as well as like what you would love to see happen for these organizations to do to turn this ship around, to get us back in the air and soaring versus being afraid of what could happen tomorrow.
Yeah. Great question. Thanks. Overall, my hope would be that when they look at their balanced scorecard or think about their triple aim goals, that they're starting to emphasize their people, their talent as the greatest resource. So however they come around to doing that, I was in a meeting with a CEO of a health system the other week, and we were talking about this thing, and I said, so what's the conversation like? You've got to get back to profitability. You've got to cut some costs. You've got to up productivity, but your people are like spent. So what do you do about it? And he was like, I don't know. Like you're going to keep going. So I think when they look at the next year and they start to do their annual planning, they start to think longer term about how to change outcomes. Adopting the mindset of putting their people first, I think, is the first step, and then get curious. And if they can figure out a way to be truly innovative at their level, then I think they'll get there. But if they don't, if they're just part of the system, then they won't get there, and it won't change. And pretty soon, you'll see in the next couple of years the bifurcation of the organizations that do this and the organizations that don't. So the marketplace will bear itself out.
It's a great way to end. Thank you again, Mike, for sharing your experience and your wisdom on the subject. I'm hopeful that we can turn things around, and I sincerely hope more organizations, get enrolled into this excellence program that you have. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the conversation.
One of my favorite things about what I get to do is it's not just hearing pharmacists who work with us and get into a job that they love, but it's hearing about what that culture is like, or what their job is like, their managers, their coworkers, their teamworkers, and it's, I'd love to say that every pharmacist is 100% happy and everyone they work with, is perfect, but we live in the real world and there is conflict. But the consistent theme that I hear from pharmacists is that even when there are problems, that there are supportive team workers to help create solutions. And what I think I learned today from Mike is that I think one of the best things that you can do for your career is to find leaders that are worth following. Find leaders that are willing to do what's right for their people, even when the decision is hard, even when there's sacrifice involved for maybe all parties or maybe just them. And, I don't know of admittedly many stories of healthcare executives, not yet anyway, but I think of a story I saw recently, and I know I'm a nerd so when I say the story, but excuse me, it recently came out, the salaries of executives within the video game company Nintendo. And yes, their salaries were in the millions, which I don't know, there's a whole discussion around that. But when you compare it to executives at other companies within the video game industry, it's a very small fraction. And there's a whole, I think, discussion about what we could make about what executives are worth and how much should they get paid. But when executives make a statement like that, and when they say, I'm going to put forth the work as the most important thing, I'm going to put forth the effort to say what we do matters. And at the end of the day, we can be profitable. And in that case, ideally, everyone benefits, not just the executive. Bold statements like that to me scream leadership. And I want to follow you. If I'm not in the video game industry, not yet anyway. But when I see something like that, it screams, I want to follow you. I want to be in your organization. I want to be in a company that makes a difference. And I hope sincerely that you can find that in your career as a pharmacist. I think my work will be done when every pharmacist can say, I'm happy with where I'm at. I love the work that I do. And I'm supported by my leaders. I feel like my leaders are doing what's right. Yeah, I've got some disagreements. Not everything is working perfectly, but I'm confident in the direction that we're going. That would be a better world that I want to fight for. And it starts with you, the pharmacist. If you are in a condition right now where you don't like where leadership is going, you are in a position where you can't change your company culture, and you want to be in something better, then I would encourage you to talk with us. We here at the Happy PharmD specialize in understanding what makes pharmacists happy in the workplace and how to identify career paths and companies and jobs, and ultimately find people that you can surround yourself with and be a little bit happier with what you do for a living. Life is too short to work in a place where you're miserable or even just unhappy, let alone unfulfilled. It's time that you should find that place. And who better to work with than career coaches that know pharmacy and ultimately career development that can lead you into a better and happier place. You can do that by clicking on a link, whether it's on this YouTube channel or our podcast notes, or just go to thehappypharmd.com and speak with one of our career advisors who can provide you with valuable insights about what you can do next with your career, and to learn more to see if coaching is a good fit for you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'm excited to see what happens next for your career. Thanks again.